When my father raised his champagne glass, the room expected a warm blessing for the newlyweds. Instead, he handed over the company I had sacrificed nearly 10 years to save. The real horror was not his public betrayal, but his rehearsed smile while doing it. Exactly 1 year later, that same brother stood at my door, pale and terrified, begging me to save the ruined ashes of his legacy. My name is Ivy Simmons. I am 36 years old, and for nearly 10 years, I traded my youth, my sleep, and my sanity to drag my family business out of an early grave. Simmons Transfer and Storage used to be nothing more than a dying local moving crew. When I was 27, the company was drowning in debt. We were the people you called when you needed a cheap truck and two guys who might show up 4 hours late smelling of stale tobacco. The ledger was bleeding cash, and bankruptcy was just a few missed payments away. I changed all of that. I threw myself into the grime and the grease. I personally rewrote our entire dispatch protocol. I built a barcode tracking system for high-value cargo from scratch. I established strict chain of custody standards for confidential documents. I transformed us from a laughingstock into a premium logistics and storage empire. I secured massive contracts with high-end law firms, private medical clinics, and corporate headquarters across the greater Columbus, Ohio area. I was the one mapping out complex warehouse transitions at 2 a.m. I was the one who memorized the freight elevator dimensions of every commercial high-rise downtown. I was the blood, the muscle, and the brain. Tonight, however, I was just the reliable older sister. The grand ballroom of the Mercer Estate Country Club was suffocatingly bright, draped in thousands of yards of white silk and overflowing with imported orchids that cost more than my first delivery truck. My brother Nolan was marrying Celeste Mercer. The Mercers were local real estate royalty, the kind of family that bought city blocks before breakfast and dictated zoning laws over afternoon tea. The wedding was a testament to their exorbitant wealth, a chaotic spectacle of 400 guests. Naturally, I was the one quietly running the show from the shadows. Throughout the afternoon, I smoothed over a scheduling conflict with the string quartet. I redirected the caterers when they brought the wrong vintage of champagne to the VIP tent. I tactfully removed a drunken groomsman from the head table before the photographers could notice. I did what I always did. I carried the heavy load so Nolan could stand in the light and look flawless. Nolan possessed a very specific, dangerous talent. He knew how to wear a bespoke suit, how to flash a perfectly symmetrical smile, and how to grip a hand just firmly enough to make a wealthy investor feel important. People looked at my younger brother and saw a born leader. They never saw the trail of abandoned projects, failed sales gigs, and half-baked startups he left behind. He tried selling luxury cars and quit after 3 months. He tried commercial real estate and lost his license over a paperwork technicality. He always had a brilliant elevator pitch, but he never stayed around long enough to clean up the wreckage when his plans inevitably crashed. I was accustomed to this dynamic. I was the engine grinding in the dark, and he was the polished hood ornament. It was an unspoken arrangement, one I tolerated because I loved the company and, foolishly, I still sought my father's elusive approval. I sat at the velvet-draped family table near the front, taking a slow sip of ice water. The gold-rimmed dinner plates had been cleared away. The hum of 400 wealthy guests exchanging pleasantries filled the massive room. Then, the sharp, distinct sound of a silver spoon tapping against crystal cut through the noise, silencing the room instantly. My father, Raymond Simmons, stood proudly at the edge of the stage. He held a microphone in one hand and a half-full glass of champagne in the other. He possessed a commanding presence, the kind of rugged, old-school charm that made people lean in when he spoke. He began with the standard, crowd-pleasing jokes. He praised Celeste for her breathtaking beauty and teased Nolan about his wild bachelor days. The crowd chuckled right on cue, but then his tone shifted. His voice dropped into a register of practiced, theatrical gravity. He began talking about tradition. He talked about the relentless spirit of the American dream, about the sacred bloodline of our family, and about the legacy he had built with his bare hands. Every word felt like a perfectly driven nail, securing a heavy lid over something I had not quite identified yet. My pulse quickened, a primal warning system firing in the back of my brain. He looked directly at Nolan, his eyes shining with a deep, reverent pride he had never, not once, directed at me. He spoke about passing the torch. He spoke about a son stepping up to lead the next generation into an era of unprecedented prosperity. My stomach turned to stone. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt incredibly thin, as if the imported flowers were sucking all the oxygen out of the room. Then, Raymond raised his glass higher, his voice booming through the towering speakers. He announced to the breathless room that he was officially handing over full operational control and 100% ownership of Simmons Transfer and Storage to Nolan. It was, he declared with a booming laugh, a wedding gift worthy of a new king. The crowd gasped in delight, followed by a thunderous wave of applause. He did not forget me entirely. Raymond turned his gaze slightly to the left, finding me sitting frozen in the crowd. With a benevolent, rehearsed smile that did not reach his cold eyes, he called me the loyal glue of the operation. He told 400 people that I was the girl who was simply irreplaceable behind the scenes. I sat perfectly still. The applause erupted around me, a deafening, sickening wave of validation for a thief. As the clapping swelled to a crescendo, the side door near the stage swung open. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out. I recognized him instantly. He was a junior partner from my father's corporate legal firm, a man I had personally paid thousands of dollars in retainer fees using company funds. He carried a heavy, dark leather folder. He walked straight to the podium and laid it open. Nolan, grinning like a man who had just conquered the world, pulled a heavy silver pen from his tuxedo pocket. He leaned over and signed the documents right there on the small stage, the flashbulbs of the wedding photographers capturing the exact moment my life's work was stolen from me. The guests cheered even louder, wiping away delicate tears of joy. They thought they were witnessing a beautiful, inspiring moment of classic American succession. They saw a father rewarding his worthy son. In the span of a single heartbeat, the sheer magnitude of the betrayal washed over me, drowning out the noise of the room. This was not a drunken, emotional whim born of wedding day euphoria. The paperwork had been drafted weeks, perhaps months, in advance. The lawyers had been briefed and paid. The signatures were merely the final, ceremonial act of a long, deliberate play. My father had carefully orchestrated this entire spectacle, ensuring that I was present in the front row. The only reason I was invited to sit at this table was to bear witness to my own public execution. I was meant to watch, paralyzed by social decorum, as I was permanently demoted to a mere employee inside the very fortress I had constructed brick by brick. A cold, absolute clarity settled over my mind, freezing out any panic, any grief, and any lingering love I had for the men on that stage. I did not shed a single tear. I did not stand up and scream about the 80-hour work weeks. I did not flip the heavy table, nor did I march up to the stage to tear the microphone from my father's hands. To cause a scene would be to give them the exact satisfaction they craved. It would validate their unspoken, sexist belief that I was too emotional, too volatile for the throne I had built. Instead, I looked down at my hands. They were steady, calloused from years of real work, entirely unlike Nolan's manicured fingers. I gently placed my crystal glass on the white linen tablecloth, aligning it perfectly with the edge of my plate. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my dress. The guests around me were too busy clapping and looking toward the stage to notice the architect quietly slipping away. I walked toward the heavy double doors at the back of the hall. I paused at the exit and turned back for one final, searing look. Raymond was clapping Nolan on the shoulder, pulling him into a tight embrace. Celeste was beaming, her hands clasped to her chest. They were entirely consumed by their stolen, fraudulent victory. I looked at my father one last time, etching his triumphant, traitorous face deep into my memory. Then, I pushed the doors open and walked out into the cool, sharp night air of Columbus. leaving the ballroom and my family far behind before the first notes of the next dance could even begin. The memory of what the company used to be is a stain I can never quite wash out of my mind. When I first stepped into the suffocating and dust-choked main office at age 27, there was no empire to inherit. There was only a decaying graveyard of terrible decisions. We were surviving on scraps, taking on disorganized, odd-moving jobs that barely kept the lights on. The revenue was dangerously unstable, fluctuating wildly from month to month based on sheer luck rather than strategy. The main storage facility was a sprawling nightmare of rotting wooden pallets, unmarked cardboard crates, and glaring fire code violations. The air smelled constantly of damp cardboard and diesel exhaust. We were continuously bleeding money and losing our few remaining clients because our drivers were perpetually late. The old trucks were constantly breaking down on the side of the highway, and the dispatch schedule was treated as a loose suggestion rather than a rigid rule. I did not merely step in to manage the decline. I gutted the entire operation and rebuilt it with my bare hands. I locked myself in that suffocating office for weeks, drinking cold coffee and breathing in the smell of old paper, to completely rewrite our dispatch protocol from scratch. I threw away the messy chalkboards and the crumpled sticky notes that had governed the yard for decades. I personally designed and implemented the framework for a rigorous digital barcode tracking system, ensuring that every single piece of furniture, every sealed plastic bin, and every archival box could be instantly located. I established brutal, unforgiving standards for our chain of custody, specifically targeting the handling of highly confidential documents. I quickly realized that hauling old sofas for residential clients would never make us truly profitable or respected. I aggressively expanded our services, shifting our entire operational focus to lucrative, high-stakes corporate office relocations, secure archival record storage, and the precise, climate-controlled transportation of non-sensitive medical equipment. I built my fortress on actual performance, not on my father's empty, backslapping charisma. I spent my evenings sitting in harsh fluorescent-lit diners and empty lobbies with the invisible people who actually kept the local economy running. I drank terrible coffee with commercial building managers, private clinic owners, and the ruthless operations directors of boutique law firms. These people did not care that my last name was Simmons. They were completely immune to the old boys club mentality that my father relied upon. They only cared about one undeniable thing. They wanted a logistics vendor who operated with surgical cleanliness, who showed up exactly on time, and who never, ever lost a single item. I became their ghost in the night. I ensured that when a law firm needed to move across the city, their paralegals could leave their old desks at 5 p.m. and sit down at their new desks the next morning without even realizing a massive, synchronized fleet of trucks had been working through the night. While I was memorizing freight elevator weight limits and arguing with warehouse landlords over lease terms, my brother Nolan was busy playing dress-up in the corporate world. He jumped carelessly from one shiny, superficial career to another, always chasing the illusion of success without the burden of labor. He tried his hand at selling luxury vehicles, strutting around the pristine showroom until the pressure of meeting an actual sales quota drove him away. He dabbled as a short-term real estate broker, chasing massive commissions but refusing to do the tedious, unglamorous paperwork required to actually close a deal. He even printed glossy business cards, declaring himself a freelance commercial representative. He always had a spectacular introductory speech ready. He knew exactly how to captivate a room for 5 minutes. But he never stayed anywhere long enough to face the harsh consequences of a failed quarter, a lost client, or a broken promise. Whenever things grew difficult, Nolan simply packed his briefcase and walked away, leaving someone else to clean up his mess. My father watched all of this unfold with a willful, deeply entrenched delusional blindness. Raymond would sit behind his heavy oak desk, look at the multi-million-dollar revenue reports I placed in front of him, glance at the soaring profit margins I had engineered, and offer me a brief, dismissive nod. He would tell me I did a good job, using the exact same tone one might use to thank a bank teller for cashing a check. But merely moments later, he would turn to his wealthy friends at the country club and loudly proclaimed that Nolan possessed a rare, innate gift for leadership. He would brag endlessly about Nolan's natural business instincts, completely ignoring the glaring mathematical reality that those instincts had never produced a single profitable financial quarter in his entire adult life. The injustice of his favoritism was woven into the very fabric of our survival. Before I took full control, the old management had committed the ultimate industry sin. They had misplaced two entirely separate shipments of highly sensitive client records. The fallout was catastrophic. Our reputation in the corporate sector was practically dead, and our commercial insurance premiums skyrocketed to completely unsustainable levels. I was the one who had to sit in the austere, intimidating boardrooms of angry corporate executives and beg for a chance to prove we had changed. I did not just increase our revenue margins. I pulled our family name back from total ruin. I ruthlessly renegotiated our liability coverage using months of my new, flawless safety data. I purged our vendor roster of lazy, overpriced suppliers who had been exploiting my father's lack of oversight. Most importantly, I fundamentally changed the culture of our own workforce. The veteran drivers and warehouse workers, hardened men who had spent years treating the company like a sinking ship, slowly began to see my vision. I stood in the freezing rain with them to verify manifests. I earned their respect through shared misery and undeniable competence. I made them believe that we were no longer just a chaotic family truck yard. I made them believe we were a formidable elite enterprise worthy of their pride. My most profound failure, the one that haunts me the most, had absolutely nothing to do with logistics, margins, or operations. My greatest mistake was a blind, childish trust. Because the man whose name was painted on the side of the building was my own father, I operated under a dangerous, naive illusion. I never forced him to sit down with lawyers and formalize a division of company shares. I never demanded a legally binding employment contract that accurately reflected my undeniable worth as the chief architect of the business. It simply never crossed my mind that a day would come when I would have to stand in a room full of people and legally prove that I was the one who built the empire everyone silently knew I built. I assumed that our shared blood guaranteed loyalty. I assumed my relentless sweat was a currency he would eventually honor when the time was right. Walking away from that wedding venue, letting the freezing night air hit my face, the absolute truth finally settled into my bones. The heavy, agonizing knot in my chest was not born from the loss of a corporate title. I did not care about the vanity of being called the chief executive. The true, unforgivable trauma was the sudden, crushing understanding of my own exploitation. I was not angry about losing a desk or a parking spot. I was enraged because I realized that nearly 10 years of my life, my fleeting youth, my chronic exhaustion, and my relentless dedication had never been valued as my own personal achievements. They had been silently, systematically harvested. I was never the heir to the kingdom. I was nothing more than an unacknowledged tool, a temporary piece of machinery used solely to build, polish, and fund the golden throne waiting for the son he had always wanted to crown. Right after the engagement ring slipped onto Celeste Mercer's finger, the prodigal son made his triumphant return to the main office. He did not come back looking for an entry-level job, nor did he come back to learn the agonizing reality of the logistics trade. He came back acting like a conquering savior who had simply been delayed. The sloppy posture and the half-baked entrepreneurial pitches of his youth were entirely gone. Now, he wore tailored navy suits that cost more than 2 months of a senior driver's salary. His voice carried a new, practiced depth, heavily laced with unearned authority. He stopped hovering near the break room water cooler and started standing at the head of the main conference table. He threw around heavy, completely empty corporate phrases. He talked endlessly about brand repositioning, expanding our high-end commercial footprint, and scaling the enterprise to a regional level. He never once explained the agonizing, operational mechanics of how we would achieve these massive things, only that he was the visionary destined to lead us there. Celeste was the invisible, brilliant architect behind this sudden transformation. She possessed a ruthless understanding of public perception and elite social networking. She did not care about the dirty, grueling reality of the freight industry, but she knew exactly how to manufacture the image of a corporate titan. Within a matter of weeks, she had curated Nolan's entire public existence. She engineered his placement at the center of high-profile charity galas, exclusive investor luncheons, and intimate, expensive dinners with our top-tier corporate clients. Photographs of him shaking hands with city council members, wealthy real estate developers, and prominent hospital administrators began flooding local social media channels and regional business journals. Meanwhile, the narrative surrounding my existence quietly shifted. I was no longer introduced as the driving force who saved the family name. I was gently but firmly repositioned in the public eye as the reliable operations handler, the gritty, unseen mechanic, making sure the mundane gears turned while the real visionary secured the shining future. My father eagerly facilitated this quiet, devastating coup. For years, the closed-door strategic meetings had involved only the two of us. We used to sit in his smoke-scented office, mapping out fleet expansions and warehouse lease negotiations late into the evening. Suddenly, a third leather chair appeared at the table. Raymond began inviting Nolan into these critical discussions. At first, I tried to view it as a positive, mature step for our family. I thought perhaps my brother was finally ready to learn the brutal mathematics of overhead costs, liability premiums, and payroll taxes, but the dynamic quickly warped into something sinister. I noticed Raymond abruptly changing the subject when I brought up long-term capital allocation or debt restructuring. He started holding separate, unrecorded conversations with Nolan behind locked doors. When I asked for the complete minutes of their private financial meetings, my father would wave his hand dismissively. He would tell me not to worry my pretty head over the boring banking minutiae, insisting I already had more than enough on my plate managing the chaotic demands of the loading yard. The veteran employees, the ones who had bled alongside me to rebuild our reputation from the ashes, sensed the deep rot before I fully allowed myself to accept it. They watched Nolan stroll through the bustling warehouse floor wearing expensive leather shoes, never once looking at the actual freight. He pulled the senior dispatchers aside, not to ask about incoming weather delays, truck maintenance schedules, or driver fatigue. Instead, he interrogated them about the proprietary list of our highest-paying accounts. He demanded immediate access to the restricted digital folders detailing the exact profit margins on our largest corporate contracts. He scrutinized our internal pricing matrices with a sudden, aggressive, and highly suspicious hunger. Yet, he never asked a single question about our secure chain of custody protocols. He showed absolute zero interest in risk management, cargo liability insurance thresholds, or the stringent climate control standards required for our sensitive medical storage units. He was exclusively hunting for the numbers that looked good on a spreadsheet, completely ignoring the fragile, complex human labor that actually produced them. I desperately tried to remain rational. I refused to let my growing paranoia destroy the delicate peace of our family just before the wedding. I convinced myself that we could harness his newfound ambition if we simply directed it properly. I drafted a formal, heavily detailed proposal for a clear division of labor. I walked into his newly redecorated office, a room that used to be a storage closet before he demanded a corner space, and laid the document on his immaculate mahogany desk. I suggested that I would retain total, undisputed control over operations, fleet logistics, and long-term structural strategy, while he could officially take over client relations, public marketing, and market development. Nolan leaned back in his expensive chair, flashed that brilliant, perfectly symmetrical smile, and told me it was a brilliant plan. He looked me right in the eye and said he just wanted me to do what I was best at. At the time, those gentle words sounded like a rare, beautiful moment of sibling respect. It took me far too long to realize it was a flawlessly executed trap. By agreeing to stay in the warehouse, I was voluntarily stepping into the shadows. I was blindly accepting the role of invisible, exhausted labor, while explicitly handing him the microphone, the public authority, and the undeniable path to absolute ownership. The final glaring warning sign came purely by accident, a quiet crack in their carefully constructed facade of family unity. It was late on a rainy Tuesday evening, long after the loading docks had closed and the yard had gone completely silent. I was sitting alone in the dark, going over the quarterly revenue projections, when an internal accountant accidentally forwarded me an email. She was a nervous younger woman who had only been with us for 8 months, and she had mistakenly attached a partial document meant strictly for my father. It was a summary sheet for a massive short-term commercial loan. The principal amount written in bold ink on that page was staggering, easily triple the debt load I firmly believed the company was currently carrying. My blood ran completely cold. The numbers made absolutely no sense given our current operational revenue. The next morning, I marched into the accounting department and confronted them. The moment I mentioned the specific loan figure, the air in the room died. Eyes darted toward the floor in terror. Voices dropped to frantic, nervous whispers. The senior controller stuttered wildly, claiming it was a draft error from an old file, and physically pulled the paper from my hands. It was glaringly obvious that a direct, non-negotiable order had been issued from the very top to lock me out of the company's true financial reality. Looking back from the cold distance of the present, the terrifying truth forms a perfect, unbreakable chain of events. The grand announcement at the wedding reception was not a spontaneous burst of patriarchal pride. It was not a sudden, foolish whim fueled by expensive imported champagne and a crowd of wealthy guests. It was the absolute, calculated pinnacle of a silent, meticulous campaign that had been breathing down my neck for nearly a year. They had systematically arranged the public image to make Nolan look like a king. They had slowly, deliberately choked off my access to the financial levers that actually controlled the business. They had isolated the hard assets, hidden the mounting debt, and prepared the final legal framework entirely behind my back. Every high society gala, every hidden meeting behind closed mahogany doors, and every deliberately misplaced financial document was a calculated step toward my complete erasure. I was blindly building an impenetrable fortress, and they were simply standing in the shadows, waiting for the final layer of mortar to dry so they could change the locks and throw me out into the cold. The air in the room shattered into a chaotic symphony of blind approval the moment the words left his mouth, handing the keys of the kingdom over. The crowd erupted. It was a visceral, herd-like reaction. Men in expensive tuxedos leaped to their feet, whistling sharply through their teeth. Women raised their glowing smartphone screens into the air, eagerly recording the spectacle for their social media feeds. I could hear snippets of their conversations bleeding through the heavy applause. People at the tables adjacent to mine were nodding solemnly, whispering to each other about how beautiful it was to witness a true, traditional American family legacy being secured. They cheered for a dynasty they believed they were seeing, completely oblivious to the graveyard of my own sweat buried beneath the floorboards. I was instantly reduced to a piece of background scenery. In the exact moment that the sheer scale of my own triumph should have been celebrated, I was painted into the corner of the portrait. My name had merely been tossed into the speech as an afterthought. I was described as the person who would diligently keep the gears running smoothly. The translation was loud and clear to anyone who understood the ruthless language of power. I was the hired help. I was the reliable engine that would continue to burn fuel, but I would never hold the title to the vehicle. Up on the stage, the celebration of the theft was in full swing. Celeste lunged forward, throwing her arms around her new father-in-law in a perfectly choreographed display of overwhelming gratitude. Her diamond rings caught the harsh stage lighting as she squeezed him tight. Nolan raised his glass high above his head, soaking in the adulation like a man dying of thirst. A line of guests was already forming near the edge of the elevated platform, eager to shake his hand. They were clapping him on the back, offering deep congratulations, treating him as though he had single-handedly dragged the enterprise from the brink of death through sheer masculine willpower. The humiliation did not stop at the stage. As the formal toasts concluded and the band began to play a loud, energetic jazz number, the crowd dispersed toward the dance floor or the open bars. Several older guests, friends of my father who had never worked a hard day in their lives, wandered past my table. They stopped to pat my shoulder with condescending sympathy. They smiled warmly and told me I must be so incredibly proud of my little brother. They praised me for being such a supportive sister, for being the steady hands behind the scenes. I had to sit there, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached, and nod politely. I was forced to swallow the bile rising in my throat as these wealthy strangers congratulated me on my own demotion. I could not endure the charade for another second. I moved deliberately through the sea of moving bodies, weaving past the celebrating guests until I reached the corner of the room where Raymond was standing. He was holding court near a massive floral arrangement, looking incredibly flushed and pleased with his own performance. I stepped directly into his line of sight. He paused, his triumphant smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. The noise of the brass band blared around us, but I spoke just softly enough that he had to lean in to hear me. I looked him dead in the eye and asked, "What about me?" It was a simple question. Holding the crushing weight of nearly 10 years of my life, I watched the muscles in his jaw tighten. He did not look surprised. He did not look guilty. He simply looked prepared. He reached out, attempting to place a paternal hand on my shoulder, but I stepped back just out of his reach. His voice dropped into a smooth, deeply rehearsed cadence. He told me that I was strong. He told me that I was always fine, that I always landed on my feet no matter what the world threw at me. Then, he delivered the killing blow. He said that Nolan needed a solid foundation to stabilize his life, and that the company was the only thing that could anchor him. That single sentence severed something vital and irreplaceable inside my chest. It hurt infinitely more than the financial loss of the business. The grotesque logic of his decision was laid bare under the harsh chandelier lights. I was being punished precisely because of my own competence, because I had proven that I could survive, because I had proven that I could rebuild a shattered ruin into an impenetrable fortress. I was deemed unworthy of the reward. My strength had been weaponized against me. I was stripped of my rightful inheritance simply because I was capable enough to endure the loss of it. Meanwhile, pure incompetence was being rewarded with an empire, solely because the incompetent son needed a massive financial safety net to prevent him from failing again. Before I could respond, a heavy scent of rich cologne announced my brother's arrival. Nolan slid perfectly into the space beside our father, still holding his half-empty crystal glass. He saw the cold, dead look on my face and immediately shifted into a defensive posture. He put on his best, most empathetic face, offering me a look of deep, brotherly concern. He told me not to worry, promising that absolutely nothing was going to change. He smiled that sickening, perfect smile and told me that I was still the absolute backbone of the place. It was the worst thing he could have possibly said. A chilling clarity washed over my mind. I understood the anatomy of a backbone perfectly well. The backbone is meant to bear the crushing, agonizing weight of the entire body. It is meant to stay hidden deep beneath the surface, grinding away in the dark to keep the structure standing upright. But the backbone is never, under any circumstances, invited to sit upon the throne. It is merely expected to carry the heavy lifting for the person who does. I did not give them the reaction they were bracing for. Raymond's shoulders were rigid. He was fully prepared for a screaming match. He was ready for me to burst into hysterical tears, to throw my drink in his face, or to cause a massive scene that would validate his secret. Sexist belief that I was too emotional to lead a real corporation. He was ready to play the calm, rational patriarch, dealing with an ungrateful, unstable daughter. I gave him absolutely nothing. I let a heavy, suffocating silence stretch between us. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice a fraction of a decibel. I simply stared at them both, looking at them not as my flesh and blood, but as hostile strangers who had just declared war. The utter lack of emotion on my face made Raymond physically flinch. He skipped a breath, entirely unnerved by the absolute zero temperature of my reaction. I had just made the silent, irreversible decision to sever ties with my own family in order to protect the last remaining shred of my dignity, and he could feel the temperature in the room shift. I turned my back on them and walked away. The heavy double doors of the ballroom felt like a portal to a different universe. I stepped out into the freezing night air. leaving the warmth, the music, and the grotesque celebration far behind. I drove straight home in complete silence, the city lights blurring past my windshield. The moment I locked my front door behind me, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a cold, mechanical, and ruthless focus. I sat down on the edge of my bed. I reached down and slowly unbuckled my expensive, uncomfortable wedding shoes, letting them drop heavily to the hardwood floor. I did not pour a drink. I did not cry into my pillow. I walked straight over to my desk, opened my personal laptop, and created a new, blank document. I spent the next 6 hours meticulously listing every single intangible asset I possessed. I was not going to steal physical property. I did not want their aging trucks, their leased warehouses, or their dirty corporate money. I wrote down the intricate, proprietary dispatch processes I had invented from scratch. I documented the specific structural flaws in the regional billing system that only I knew how to navigate to maximize profit margins. I listed the private, direct mobile phone numbers of the elite facility managers, hospital directors, and senior law partners who trusted my voice and my word, not the company letterhead. I detailed the exact logistics algorithms I had created over hundreds of sleepless nights to move sensitive medical equipment without voiding the strict manufacturer warranties. They truly believed they had taken my company. As the sun began to rise, painting my bedroom window in shades of cold gray, I looked at the thousands of words I had just typed out. They had merely kept the hollow shell of a building and a meaningless family name. The actual brain, the beating heart, and the unyielding engine of the empire were sitting right here in this quiet room, completely free, and ready to build something they could never touch. The sky was still a bruised purple when I pulled into the gravel lot of the main headquarters. It was 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning. The massive steel rolling doors of the loading bays were shut tight, and the entire fleet of trucks sat silent in the freezing mist. I unlocked the heavy glass front door and walked through the dark lobby. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I knew exactly where everything was. I walked straight to my desk. I bypassed the desktop computer completely. Instead, I pulled my personal laptop from my leather bag. Over the years, because the company refused to upgrade our technology budget, I had built the entire routing architecture, the secure chain of custody protocols, and the predictive scheduling models on my own machine. I gathered my handwritten strategic notebooks, the ones filled with the unlisted personal phone numbers of every major commercial property manager in the metropolitan area. I packed them away. I wiped my personal login credentials from the local server. Then, I took the heavy brass master key off my ring. I set it gently on the center of my desk next to a small piece of blank white paper. I took a pen and wrote 2 words, "Good luck." By 9 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting in the sleek, glass-walled downtown office of Mara Keene. Mara was a viciously smart corporate attorney. 4 years ago, when her boutique firm was expanding and practically drowning in disorganized case files, I personally orchestrated their weekend relocation. I moved their entire archival library without misplacing a single paperclip. She owed me a favor, and she was not the type of woman to forget a debt. I laid out the events of the wedding without a single shred of emotion. I told her about the microphone, the speech, and the sudden transfer of ownership. Mara leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she tapped a silver pen against her desk. She asked to see my employment contract. I told her I did not have one. I told her I was family. Mara did not offer me pity. She offered me the cold, brutal edge of the law. Within 2 hours, her paralegals had pulled every public filing, every corporate registration, and every operating agreement tied to my father and the business. The first truth she handed across the table was a weapon disguised as a legal vacuum, because my father had relied entirely on blood loyalty to exploit my labor. He had completely neglected basic corporate compliance. I had never signed a non-compete agreement. I had never signed an intellectual property transfer. Furthermore, despite his vague paternal promises over the years about my stake in the legacy, I owned exactly 0% of the company shares. Legally, I was nothing more than an at-will employee who had just quit. But I was an at-will employee who owned every single brilliant idea in my own head. The second truth Mara uncovered was significantly darker. It explained the baffling theatricality of the wedding speech. She slid a thick stack of printed financial disclosures toward me. There was a massive lien on our primary warehouse facility. Raymond had quietly used the core assets of our company as collateral to guarantee a massive commercial loan 2 years ago. The money was not used for new trucks or better logistics software. It was used to fund a disastrous, doomed commercial real estate venture that Nolan had pitched before he gave up and ran away. My brother had dug a hole so deep it threatened to swallow the entire family. My father, desperate to protect his golden child, had bet the company to cover the losses, but the debt service was suffocating them. That was the real reason Nolan suddenly reappeared with tailored suits and a wealthy fiancée. The marriage to Celeste Mercer was a calculated financial bailout. The grand presentation of the company on the wedding stage was not a loving father rewarding his son. It was a high-stakes performance carefully designed for the audience. The guests clapping in the front rows included private bankers, regional loan officers, and the intimidating patriarch of the Mercer family. My father had to prove to his creditors and his new, wealthy in-laws that Nolan was firmly in control of a stable, legacy enterprise. They needed the Mercer family capital to refinance the secret debt, and they used my flawless operational record to make the company look like a prize worth saving. I was the fresh coat of paint on a condemned building. My phone rang later that afternoon. It was my mother, Denise. I answered, knowing exactly what was coming. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask why I had walked out of the biggest family celebration of the decade. Her voice was thin, sharp, and dripping with aggressive disappointment. She accused me of ruining the family vibe. She told me I was deeply selfish for making my brother's special day all about my own bruised ego. She said that family requires sacrifice, and that a good sister would have stayed to celebrate the success of the household. For the first time in my entire life, I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice to defend my sleepless nights or my destroyed youth. I listened to her breathe heavily into the receiver, waiting for my usual apology. I finally understood the rules of their game. People only dare to call the truth cold or selfish when they have grown incredibly comfortable benefiting from your silent suffering. I hung up the phone without saying a single word. The reality of my absence hit the main office by Tuesday. My phone began lighting up with rapid, consecutive voicemails from Nolan. The false bravado of the wedding day was rapidly dissolving. His first message was dripping with condescension, telling me not to overreact, and demanding I come back to my desk to handle the end-of-month billing cycle. By Thursday, his tone had shifted into a frantic, thinly veiled panic. The new logistics software he had bragged about did not integrate with the legacy hospital contracts. The drivers were refusing to take orders from the new marketing hires. In his fourth voicemail, he begged me to just come in for a few hours. He said he needed me to keep the company stable during the transition phase. He needed my brain to operate the machinery he had just stolen. With every desperate message, he inadvertently confessed to the entire world that he was an imposter, wearing a crown he did not know how to balance. I sat at my kitchen table and deleted his voice from my phone. The shock of the betrayal had entirely evaporated, leaving behind a pure, highly refined adrenaline. I opened my notebook and began to write down my true inventory. I did not own moving trucks, but I owned the absolute trust of the regional hospital administrators who knew my voice. I did not own a warehouse, but I owned the flawless operational blueprints that guaranteed sensitive documents would never go missing. I did not own the family name, but I owned my own reputation. In the commercial logistics industry, a clean reputation was worth infinitely more than an old logo painted on a rusty door. By the time the sun set on Friday, I had stopped mourning the loss of a poisoned inheritance. I looked at the legal documents Mara had drafted for my new corporate entity. I was no longer the tragic, ousted daughter of a deceitful patriarch. I was a fully armed competitor, standing at the edge of the market, holding every single secret my family foolishly believed they had secured with a glass of champagne. I drained my savings accounts down to the last available dollar. The financial security I had painstakingly built over a decade vanished in a single afternoon of wire transfers. I signed a commercial lease on a small, cinder-block warehouse located on the gritty, industrial edge of the city, miles away from the polished downtown districts. It was drafty. The roof carried a suspicious water stain in the far corner, and the ancient fluorescent overhead lights hummed with a maddening, constant buzz. I purchased 2 heavily used commercial box trucks at a regional freight auction. They possessed high mileage, worn tires, and faded exterior paint, but I had personally inspected the undercarriages. The engines were completely sound, and the rear cargo boxes were absolutely watertight. I sat in Mara Keene's pristine law office one last time to finalize the operating agreements and file the state registration paperwork. We officially named the entity Iron Ledger Transfer and Vault. The name was not merely a brand, it was a binding promise to the market. There would be no broken chains of custody under my watch. I established a rigid, unbreakable operational rule on the very first morning. Iron Ledger was not going to be a sprawling, chaotic catch-all-moving company like the one my family operated. We were absolutely not going to haul cheap residential furniture, nor would we take desperate, low-margin freight loads just to keep the trucks visible on the highway. I positioned my new enterprise with ruthless, surgical specificity. We would exclusively handle highly sensitive corporate office relocations, secure archival document storage, and complex logistical projects requiring a legally binding, unbroken chain of custody. These were the high-liability, high-stakes jobs where a silver tongue and a tailored designer suit were entirely useless. In this specific, unforgiving corner of the industry, the vendor who actually knew how to map a secure transit route, manage a temperature-controlled vault, and guarantee absolute confidentiality would always defeat the vendor who only knew how to deliver a charismatic sales pitch. The dual reality of those first 2 months pushed my physical and mental endurance to its absolute breaking point. During the daylight hours, I was nothing more than a common laborer in my own building. I bought heavy-duty steel shelving units from a bankrupt retail liquidator and spent countless hours bolting the heavy metal beams together until the skin on my knuckles cracked and bled. I crawled across the freezing concrete floor on my hands and knees, manually measuring, taping, and painting the bright yellow staging lines required to designate the secure storage zones. I personally wired the server rack in the small back office and installed the proprietary barcode tracking software I had rebuilt entirely from memory. Then, when the sun finally went down and my muscles screamed in dull, agonizing protest, I would wash the industrial grease off my hands, open my laptop, and become the chief executive officer. I drank terrible, lukewarm coffee and drafted highly detailed, customized service proposals. I sent these documents directly to the private email addresses of the corporate administrators, facility managers, and senior legal partners who had historically respected my operational execution. I was betting my entire survival on the hope that they trusted my personal competence far more than they respected the Simmons family surname. The silence of a brand new business is a terrifying, heavy thing. But eventually, the phone rang. It was the managing partner of a boutique civil litigation firm I had worked with several years prior. He did not offer me a lucrative, multi-floor corporate headquarters relocation. He offered me a grueling, tedious, and highly sensitive weekend project that larger companies usually rejected out of hand. They needed an off-site storage room, packed to the ceiling with 7 years of disorganized, highly confidential case files and legal depositions, completely categorized, boxed, and moved to a new secure vault within 48 hours. It was a test of my capabilities. I drove one of the used trucks myself. I spent 30 straight hours locked in a dusty, poorly ventilated basement. I scanned, sealed, and documented every single archival box with an absolute paranoid level of precision. I swept their old storage unit completely clean before I locked the door. On Monday morning, before I even had the chance to generate and email my formal invoice, the senior partner called my cell phone. He told me it was the most flawless, secure logistical transfer his firm had ever experienced. and he promised to hand me their entire regional storage contract the moment their current lease expired. In the insular, quiet world of commercial real estate and high-level corporate management, trust is an incredibly scarce currency. Once you prove you actually possess it, the word spreads organically. That single, grueling law firm project initiated a vital chain reaction of referrals. The law firm partner recommended Iron Ledger to the property manager of their commercial high-rise building. That property manager, desperate for genuine competence, hired me to handle a complex private medical clinic relocation involving fragile, highly expensive imaging machines that required exact climate control. The clinic director then mentioned my flawless execution to the managing director of a massive regional accounting firm. By the end of the second month, a major commercial office developer contacted me directly. They essentially begged me to salvage a massive, highly complex end-of-quarter corporate move that their current logistics vendor was fundamentally failing to organize. I took the job, meticulously planned the complex freight elevator routes in 3 days, and executed the entire move flawlessly under the cover of darkness. The sheer volume of incoming requests rapidly outpaced my physical ability to drive the trucks, load the cargo, and manage the secure vault simultaneously. I urgently needed to hire staff, but I refused to simply hire warm bodies to fill uniforms. I reached out to Tess Marlowe first. Tess was a brilliant, sharp-minded dispatch coordinator at my old company. Nolan had constantly treated her like a glorified secretary, openly dismissing her complex routing schedules and habitually talking over her in management meetings. I offered her a slight pay cut, terrible initial health benefits, but absolute, unquestioned autonomy over the digital logistics board. She quit her job the very next morning and walked into my freezing warehouse carrying her own battered thermos of coffee. Next, I tracked down Wade Kessler. Wade was a grizzled, veteran commercial driver who had recently been suspended by Nolan for explicitly refusing to drive an overloaded truck with failing brakes. Wade did not care about corporate synergy, brand marketing, or empty motivational speeches. He cared exclusively about vehicle maintenance, proper cargo load distribution, and arriving at the loading dock exactly on time. I tossed him the keys to the better of my 2 used trucks, and he went straight to work without asking a single unnecessary question. Iron Ledger Transfer and Vault did not experience a flashy, explosive surge in the local business press. We did not throw catered launch parties, nor did we buy expensive billboard space on the interstate highway. Our growth was a quiet, relentless, creeping vine. We built our foundation entirely on the difficult, invisible, highly stressful contracts that the general public never noticed, but that every serious professional in the industry completely understood and deeply valued. The stories of our absolute precision, our airtight security protocols, and our zero-defect delivery rate began to circulate rapidly in the exact corporate boardrooms where my brother was currently trying to sell his empty, unfulfilled promises. The deep, stinging humiliation of the wedding toast still lived somewhere in the dark corners of my mind. It was a jagged emotional scar that would likely never fully heal. Yet, standing in the center of my cold concrete warehouse, listening to Tess aggressively negotiate a strict freight elevator schedule on the phone, while Wade meticulously inspected the tire pressure on his rig, I felt a profound, grounding sense of peace. I looked down at the bright yellow lines I had painted on the floor with my own hands. I looked at the towering steel racks holding thousands of confidential files that powerful people trusted exclusively to me. For the absolute first time in my adult life, I was building a fortress that belonged entirely to me. There were no phantom shareholders operating in the shadows. There was no patriarch waiting in the wings to steal the credit for my labor. Most importantly, I was finally holding something tangible, something undeniably real, that could never be snatched out of my hands just because someone decided a careless boy needed it more. Across the city, the illusion of a corporate renaissance was being aggressively broadcasted to anyone who would pay attention. Within his first 30 days at the helm, Nolan poured an obscene amount of borrowed capital into a complete brand overhaul. He despised the classic, muted colors that had defined our commercial trucks for decades. claiming they looked entirely too archaic for a modern enterprise. He hired an overpriced downtown design firm to create a sleek, aggressive new logo and a catchy, meaningless new slogan. He brought in a professional film crew to shoot high-definition promotional videos for his social media channels. In these heavily edited videos, he strutted through the loading bays wearing expensive tailored suits, pointing authoritatively at pallets of cargo he did not understand, acting as though the family enterprise had never operated better. To justify this massive marketing expenditure and to create the immediate illusion of explosive regional growth, he began aggressively slashing our standard service rates. He offered deep, unsustainable discounts, sometimes cutting initial contract prices by 40%, just to win bids and announce new client acquisitions on his internet profiles. But commercial logistics is a brutally unforgiving mathematics equation, and pride cannot subsidize a negative balance sheet. Because my brother possessed absolutely no understanding of our true profit margins, he fundamentally failed to realize why my prices had been set at that specific level in the first place. High-end commercial relocations require expensive liability insurance, specialized packing materials, and highly skilled labor. By severely undercutting the established market rate to secure cheap, public victories, he pushed the company into dangerously unprofitable territory. To compensate for the rapidly shrinking revenue per job, he started cutting vital operational corners in the dark. He drastically reduced the mandatory training period for new warehouse staff from 2 full weeks down to a mere 2 days. He replaced our experienced salaried union laborers with cheap, inexperienced temporary workers who had zero background in secure freight handling. When the veteran dispatchers tried to warn him that the active roster was stretched entirely too thin and the new crews were careless, he completely ignored them, accusing the old guard of being stubborn and resistant to his modern corporate innovation. The inevitable structural collapse did not take years to manifest. It took exactly 2 months. The first major disaster struck during a seemingly routine transfer of a large regional dental clinic. Because the newly hired temporary workers had absolutely no concept of our secure zoning protocols, they completely mislabeled over 500 boxes of highly sensitive patient medical records. The archives were unloaded into the wrong storage facility entirely, causing a catastrophic, week-long operational delay for the medical clinic and triggering a massive, highly public privacy compliance investigation. Less than 10 days later, a disorganized moving crew dropped a highly expensive, custom-built server rack during a corporate office relocation. Nolan was forced to authorize a massive financial settlement to replace the destroyed technology equipment, completely wiping out the entire profit margin for that business quarter. The absolute breaking point arrived when a wealthy, long-term VIP client personally called the main office to complain. The client explicitly stated that while the new owner was incredibly gifted at offering smooth apologies and buying expensive lunches, he was entirely incapable of actually fixing the massive operational disasters his cheap crews were causing on the ground. While my family's empire was loudly suffocating under the heavy weight of its own incompetence, my small, quiet fortress was thriving. Iron Ledger had just secured its most significant victory to date. We won a massive, exclusive logistics contract with Harbor Crest Development, one of the most powerful and demanding commercial real estate developers in the state. I did not win their business by taking their executives to a fancy steakhouse or by recklessly slashing my service prices. I won it by submitting a meticulously crafted, 90-page operational proposal that detailed every single aspect of their upcoming corporate relocation, right down to the specific weight distribution of their imported executive conference tables. When the managing director of Harbor Crest finally signed the heavy legal agreement, he looked across the conference table and delivered a sentence that validated every sleepless night I had endured over the past year. He told me that finally, he had found someone who truly understood that they were not renting moving trucks. They were renting absolute peace of mind. News of the Harbor Crest contract inevitably leaked back to my brother. Panic is a highly visible, destructive emotion when it infects a man who survives strictly on unearned confidence. Nolan began scrambling, desperately trying to project total authority while secretly searching the sinking ship for a life raft. In a pathetic, transparent attempt to stop the bleeding, he tried to mimic my exact management style. He frantically ordered his marketing team to rewrite their promotional materials using the specific, technical logistical language I had developed years ago. He even went so far as to secretly message a few of my former warehouse managers, explicitly asking them to email him blank copies of the secure chain of custody forms I had personally designed from scratch. The veteran employees who were still trapped over there began to see entirely through the tailored designer suits and the hollow, rehearsed speeches. They realized with horrifying clarity that their newly crowned executive visionary was entirely dependent on the stolen blueprints of the woman he had just publicly exiled. He was merely a ghost trying to wear my heavy armor, and the weight of it was crushing him. The mounting desperation eventually drove him to cross an unforgivable industry line. Late one Thursday evening, I received a secure, encrypted digital message from a senior accountant who was still working under Nolan but remained deeply loyal to me. She was terrified of losing her pension, but she felt I urgently needed to know the truth. Nolan was actively holding secret boardroom negotiations with a massive, faceless rival logistics conglomerate. He was not trying to sell our aging trucks or our empty warehouses. He was trying to quietly sell off a massive portion of our proprietary, top-tier client list in exchange for a rapid injection of short-term cash. This was the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal in our specific line of work. Client lists in the secure transport sector are built on deep, personal trust and absolute, unwavering confidentiality. Selling those private corporate names to a massive competitor simply to cover a bad financial quarter was a cardinal sin that would permanently destroy the family reputation I had spent 10 agonizing years trying to wash clean. I held a devastating, lethal weapon right in my hands. I possessed the direct mobile phone numbers of every single major client on that targeted list. With 5 minutes of brief phone calls, I could easily leak the news of the impending corporate sale, completely torch Nolan's fragile financial lifeline, and trigger a massive, immediate exodus of his few remaining profitable accounts. I could bury his entire legacy in a single afternoon. The temptation to play a dirty, vindictive game was incredibly strong, a bitter, intoxicating poison sitting right at the back of my throat. But I chose to put the telephone down. I absolutely refused to sink to his pathetic level of corporate sabotage. I did not need to actively destroy him, because he was already executing the demolition perfectly on his own. Instead of focusing my energy on his impending ruin, I poured every ounce of my focus into my own operational excellence. I tightened my security protocols even further. I spent extra hours on the weekend training Wade and Tess on advanced legal compliance standards. I made absolutely sure that every single Iron Ledger contract was executed with terrifying, flawless perfection. The stark, undeniable contrast between the two rival companies was becoming impossible for the regional market to ignore. The wealthy clients were watching. The local commercial industry was watching. I did not want the audience to see me win a dirty, mud-slinging street fight. I wanted them to witness my absolute, undeniable victory through the pure application of the exact same competence my father had once deemed too strong to be properly rewarded. I was going to let the blinding, undeniable light of my own success cast the final, fatal shadow over their stolen empire. The heavy steel doors of my warehouse were rolled wide open to let in the crisp afternoon air. The sprawling concrete floor hummed with the steady, synchronized rhythm of genuine labor. Forklifts beeped in the distance, and the sharp sound of packing tape sealing heavy cardboard echoed off the high ceiling. I was standing near the loading dock with a clipboard, verifying a complex archival manifest, when I saw a luxury sedan slowly pull into my gravel lot. The vehicle looked entirely out of place among the massive freight trucks and oil stains. The driver door opened, and my mother stepped out. Denise wore a pristine cream cashmere sweater and perfectly pressed slacks. She looked like a ghost wandering onto a battlefield. She did not march up to me with her usual aggressive posture. She walked slowly, her eyes scanning the towering steel racks, the flawless yellow safety lines, and the quiet efficiency of my crew. For the absolute first time in my entire existence, She looked at something I had built without immediately comparing it to whatever my brother was doing. I handed my clipboard to Wade and walked toward her. I did not offer a greeting. I simply led her into my small, bare office and closed the door, cutting off the industrial noise of the yard. She sat down on a cheap folding chair. Up close, the meticulous facade she always wore had severely cracked. The skin around her eyes looked thin and exhausted. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. She did not offer a maternal apology. Instead, she offered a weary, devastating confession. She stared at the blank wall behind my desk and told me that my father had been entirely consumed by blind panic for the better part of a year. The massive commercial loans he had guaranteed were defaulting. The banks were closing in. Raymond had spent countless nights pacing the floors of their large, empty house, terrified of losing the country club membership, the social status, and the generational pride of the family name. According to my mother, the engagement to Celeste Mercer was never just a romantic milestone. It was a desperate, calculated financial transaction. Raymond firmly believed that if Nolan stood at the altar as the undisputed owner and chief executive of a thriving logistics empire, the wealthy Mercer family would open their massive private equity vaults. The Mercers would eagerly fund a massive warehouse expansion, which would quietly serve as a vehicle to refinance the suffocating family debt. The brutal reality crystallized in the freezing air of my office. I had not been pushed off the stage because I lacked the vision to lead. I had been dragged to the sacrificial altar because I was the only asset valuable enough to trade. My decade of grueling, flawless labor was simply the dowry attached to my brother. They dressed him up in my achievements, slapped a wedding bow on his chest, and sold him to a real estate dynasty to save the patriarchal balance sheet. I was completely erased simply to preserve the fragile, unearned pride of the men in my family. My mother looked down at her expensive shoes and whispered that they never meant to hurt me. I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing but a hollow, freezing clarity. I told her that using a person as a structural pillar for 10 years, only to violently smash that pillar to pieces, is an act of deliberate destruction. Before she could muster a defense, a heavy knock rattled the frosted glass of my office door. The door pushed open, and Nolan stood in the threshold. If my mother looked exhausted, my brother looked completely destroyed. The arrogant, untouchable golden boy from the wedding reception was entirely gone. His expensive tailored suit was hopelessly wrinkled, hanging loosely on his frame as if he had lost a significant amount of weight in a matter of weeks. The dark circles under his eyes were bruised and heavy. He looked at our mother, clearly shocked to see her sitting there, but he was too desperate to care about family politics. He asked her to leave. He said he needed to speak with me alone. Denise stood up, offering no resistance. She could not bear to look at either of us. She quietly slipped out the door, leaving the two of us standing in the stark, unforgiving light of the room. Nolan collapsed into the chair she had just vacated. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a ragged, trembling breath. The illusion of his corporate kingdom was finally bleeding to death. He did not try to spin the narrative. He looked up at me and confessed that the entire operation was violently spiraling out of his control. 3 of our oldest, most lucrative corporate clients had officially terminated their contracts within the last 48 hours. The vendors who supplied our packing materials and truck fuel were aggressively demanding cash on delivery because our accounts payable department was completely paralyzed. Worst of all, the private commercial lenders had caught wind of the massive revenue hemorrhage. They had officially issued a demand for a comprehensive, immediate financial audit. He looked like a terrified child who had stolen a complicated machine and was now watching it catch fire. I leaned back against my desk and asked him the only question that still mattered. I asked him why he took it. I asked him why he stood on that stage and accepted a crown he knew he did not earn. Nolan stared at his shaking hands. His voice cracked as he spoke. He told me that he knew I was the rightful heir. He knew every single dollar in the bank account was a direct result of my blood and sweat. But he took the microphone anyway, because when Raymond looked at him during that toast, it was the very first time in his entire life that our father looked at him with genuine, unadulterated pride. Nolan confessed that he had spent his whole existence feeling like a charming, useless disappointment. The feeling of being viewed as a capable, reliable savior was an intoxicating drug. He was addicted to that fleeting validation, a high far stronger than the allure of actual money. I listened to his confession without a single ounce of visible emotion. The silence in the room stretched out, heavy and absolute. I did not soften. I did not walk over and wrap my arms around his shaking shoulders. I looked him directly in the eyes and told him the cold truth. I told him that his sudden, desperate realization did not magically rebuild my lost youth. I told him that feeling remorse only when the consequences finally arrive does not absolve a thief of the theft. However, I also refused to play the role of a vindictive villain. I was a professional, and I was looking at a man drowning in a profound lack of competence. I told him I would not return to save his sinking ship, but I would give him 3 pieces of free advice. First, I told him to immediately cease all discounted, low-margin bidding. Every cheap contract he accepted was only accelerating his bankruptcy. Second, I ordered him to pick up his telephone, cancel his fancy marketing lunches, and personally call every single corporate client his temporary cruise had damaged. I told him to offer pure, humiliating apologies without a single corporate buzzword attached. Finally, I told him to fire his expensive marketing team, walk out onto the loading dock, and promote the most abrasive veteran warehouse manager he could find to run the daily operations. I told him to surrender his own authority to someone who actually knew how to move freight. Nolan absorbed the brutal instructions. He slowly stood up, looking entirely defeated. He reached for the brass doorknob, pausing before he turned it. He looked back over his shoulder, his eyes red and glassy. He asked me a heavy, agonizing question. He asked if I had ever truly hated him. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. The instinct to scream yes, to hurl my years of resentment directly at his face, was incredibly strong. But as I looked at his broken posture, the raw anger inside my chest dissolved into a profound, suffocating sorrow. I did not answer him immediately. Hating Nolan would be the easiest, most convenient path. But hating him required me to pretend that he was the sole architect of my misery. The agonizing truth was far more complex and far more tragic. I looked at my brother and realized we were both mere products of a deeply poisoned environment. We both grew up in a hollow house where love was never unconditional. Love was a calculated currency, attached to strict, impossible conditions. For me, love was permanently withheld because my father was terrified of my strength. For Nolan, love was falsely granted strictly to preserve a public image. Nolan was not a one-dimensional monster who intentionally set out to destroy my life. He was a deeply flawed, desperately insecure boy who had been weaponized by a father obsessed with keeping up appearances. We had both been sacrificed on the exact same altar of family pride. The knife just happened to cut us in completely different ways. I looked at him, standing in the doorway of the empire I had built from the ashes of his mistakes. I told him I did not hate him. I told him I just pitied the fact that he traded his sister for a ghost that was never going to love him back. Nolan actually attempted to follow my parting advice. He made the humiliating phone calls to the furious corporate clients. He officially ceased the reckless discount bidding strategy. But the structural damage to the foundation was already far too severe to be patched with simple apologies. The Tri-State Commercial Review Office, the ruthless government body that regulates high-security commercial logistics, descended on the main headquarters for an unannounced, aggressive audit. The state inspectors did not care about his tailored suits or his practiced charm. They dug directly into the recent dental clinic disaster and uncovered a massive, systemic failure in the chain of custody protocols under his brief regime. The inspectors found unsealed archival boxes, completely undocumented transit logs, and inexperienced temporary laborers handling strictly confidential financial records. The regulatory board acted with brutal efficiency. They immediately drafted a formal notice of intent to revoke the specialized secure storage license of the company. Without that specific state certification, the business was legally barred from handling any medical, legal, or corporate data. The core revenue engine, the very heart of the enterprise I had built, was completely shut down by a single piece of government paper. The regulatory suspension acted as a massive distress flare in the financial sky, instantly alerting every creditor circling the wounded animal. The private commercial lenders, the ones who held the massive secret debt my father had secured against the property, did not hesitate for a single second. Their aggressive forensic accountants tore through the collapsing balance sheets and easily discovered multiple severe violations of their financial covenants. The operating revenue had plummeted dangerously below the mandatory minimum thresholds, and the monthly interest payments were officially severely overdue. The bank lawyers moved with terrifying mechanical speed. They filed a formal default notice and immediately secured a judge to issue a court order to seize the primary physical assets. The massive central warehouse facility and the entire main fleet of heavy transport trucks were legally locked down. Heavy iron padlocks were placed on the main security gates. The entire operational empire was physically and legally paralyzed in a matter of hours. When the massive financial crater finally became public knowledge within the wealthy social circles of the city, the strategic foundation of the recent marriage instantly vaporized. Celeste and the powerful Mercer dynasty did not amass their fortune by standing on sinking ships or associating with public failures. The moment the patriarch of the Mercer family realized the supposed corporate expansion he was meant to fund was actually a catastrophic black hole of toxic debt. He aggressively pulled his daughter away from the blast radius. Celeste did not stay in the massive house to offer her new husband any emotional support. She coldly packed her expensive designer luggage and returned to her secure family estate. The pristine, highly curated public image that Nolan had so desperately utilized to justify his corporate theft shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. He was left completely isolated in an empty, heavily mortgaged house, entirely abandoned by the very people he had sold his soul to impress. The final, devastating emotional blow did not come from a ruthless bank or a cold regulatory agency. It arrived on a quiet Tuesday evening in the form of a heavily slurred, agonizing voicemail from my father. I sat alone in the dark quiet of my kitchen, staring at the glowing screen of my mobile phone, listening to the voice of a man who had completely run out of lies and leverage. Raymond sounded incredibly old, his voice completely stripped of the booming, theatrical authority he had always wielded like a heavy weapon. He was openly weeping into the receiver. He confessed, his words stumbling over each other in the dark, that he knew he was committing a profound, unforgivable injustice the exact moment he raised his champagne glass at the wedding reception. He admitted he had taken the path of absolute least resistance. He chose to hand the ultimate public reward to the fragile son who desperately needed to be rescued, while actively forcing the strong, deserving daughter to shoulder the brutal, silent consequences of his fear. He told the recording that he had spent his entire adult life confusing his own blind panic with paternal love, and mistaking his destructive favoritism for traditional family loyalty. He was no longer the stubborn, imposing patriarch demanding absolute submission from his children. He was just a terrified, broken old man watching the legacy he spent his entire life building turn to ash, fully realizing that his own two hands had struck the fatal match. The raw agony in his voice was a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, the innate, biological instinct to comfort my father flared up strongly in my mind. But I forced my hand to stay perfectly still on the wooden surface of the kitchen table. I did not call him back. I let the heavy silence of the house stretch out, allowing the crushing reality of his delayed confession to mingle with the frantic text messages I was receiving from former veteran employees who were suddenly locked out of their jobs without severance pay. Forgiving him in the dark, without forcing him to stand in the harsh light of the massive consequences he engineered, would be a massive betrayal of my own brutal survival. A quick emotional reconciliation over the phone would simply be another toxic version of the fake, convenient appeasement our family had always practiced to keep the peace. True accountability requires staring directly into the total wreckage you created. I needed the destructive fire to burn completely out before I could even consider walking through the remaining ashes. The very next morning, The absolute finality of the situation materialized in a brief phone call from an independent commercial real estate broker I had known for years. He informed me that the private bank was absolutely not interested in restructuring the toxic debt or waiting for a miracle. The massive central warehouse, the remaining operational trucks, the commercial logistics equipment, and the entire physical infrastructure of the old company were being aggressively pushed into a forced commercial auction to quickly liquidate the assets. The broker warned me that a massive, ruthless national logistics chain, a corporation entirely known for undercutting local markets and delivering terrible, careless service, was heavily eyeing the lot. They possessed massive cash reserves and wanted to buy the corpse of my family business for absolute pennies just to completely swallow our regional market share and permanently eliminate local competition. The news presented a cold, massive crossroads that I could not ignore. I stood in the center of my own thriving warehouse, surrounded by the undeniable, physical proof of my competence, and faced a monumental, defining choice. I could easily choose to do absolutely nothing. I could stand securely behind my own walls, protect my own profitable accounts, and watch the old family name get sold for scrap metal to a faceless corporate giant. I could simply let the painful past die a quiet, humiliating death on the auction block. Or I could willingly step into that hostile, public auction room. I could force myself to stand face to face with my ruined family, the angry institutional creditors, and the aggressive corporate vultures. I had to decide, for the absolute first time in my existence, wielding my own unborrowed financial power. Exactly what pieces of the past were actually worth saving, and exactly what toxic pieces I needed to finally let die. The forced liquidation auction took place in a sterile, windowless conference room inside a downtown corporate legal building. The aesthetic symmetry of the moment was viciously poetic. There were no imported white orchids, no brass bands playing lively jazz, and absolutely no crystal glasses filled with expensive champagne. The air was suffocatingly dry, smelling only of cheap stale coffee and printer toner. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors, holding a thick leather folder containing the pristine financial records and pre-approved credit lines of Iron Ledger Transfer and Vault. I did not require an invitation, nor did I need an introduction. I simply took a seat at the back of the room. My father and brother sat at a long table near the front. The physical toll of the last 12 months was violently evident. Raymond had aged 10 years in a single calendar cycle. His broad shoulders were slumped, his expensive suit hanging loosely on a defeated frame. Nolan sat completely motionless beside him, staring blankly at the legal documents spread across the table. Across the aisle sat the corporate vultures, representatives from a massive, notoriously ruthless national logistics chain were whispering among themselves, eagerly preparing to purchase my family legacy for pennies on the dollar simply to dismantle it and eliminate regional competition. The presiding auctioneer, a cold man representing the primary commercial bank, began reading the asset valuations. The representatives from the national chain immediately interrupted, loudly questioning the viability of the proprietary digital routing systems and the commercial client lists included in the lot. They aggressively argued that the assets were severely overvalued given the recent public operational failures and regulatory suspensions under my brother. They demanded a massive discount. Then, something entirely unexpected occurred. Raymond stood up. He did not possess a microphone this time, but his voice echoed sharply against the bare walls. He addressed the auctioneer, the hostile corporate bidders, and the court stenographer recording the minutes. Under the immense pressure of the creditors, desperate to prevent the national chain from stealing the physical assets for nothing, my father finally told the absolute, undeniable truth on a legally binding public record. He explicitly stated that the operational systems, the complex digital routing architecture, and the core commercial relationships were fundamentally flawless. He declared, his voice trembling slightly, that those systems were completely designed, built, and maintained entirely by his daughter over the span of nearly a decade. He publicly confessed that the recent failures were solely due to gross mismanagement after my departure, and that the underlying architecture I had created was world-class. Sitting in the back row, I listened to the court reporter type his words on her machine. That formal declaration did not magically restore the exhausted years of my youth. It did not erase the agonizing humiliation of the wedding night. However, it completely and permanently incinerated the grotesque lie my family had paraded around the city. For the very first time, the reality of my labor was spoken aloud in a stark, unforgiving environment where it could never be softened by sentimental family excuses, manipulated by false smiles, or rewritten by a wedding toast. When the formal bidding commenced, the national chain submitted their insultingly low offer. I raised my hand and submitted my counteroffer. I did not bid on the entire corporate corpse. I explicitly refused to purchase the brand name Simmons Transfer and Storage. That name was thoroughly poisoned, representing a toxic history of exploitation that I had no desire to resurrect. Instead, I surgically extracted only the assets that possessed genuine value. I placed a winning bid on the massive central storage facility, assuming its remaining commercial mortgage. I purchased the 3 transport trucks that were still in excellent mechanical condition. I bought out a handful of salvageable corporate contracts that I knew I could immediately rehabilitate. Most importantly, I secured the legal to priority right to rehire the veteran drivers and dispatchers who had been unfairly stranded by the sudden financial collapse. The bank representatives eagerly accepted my financial terms. As the auctioneer finalized the transaction, the room fell into a heavy silence. I stood up from my chair and addressed the room, my voice calm and completely steady. I stated clearly for the record that the Simmons commercial name would officially cease to exist the moment the ink dried on the legal transfer. I told them I possessed absolutely no intention of operating my enterprise under the shadow of a family that had happily used my spine as a stepping stone. Every single purchased asset, every truck, and every square foot of warehouse space was to be immediately absorbed into Iron Ledger Transfer and Vault, operating strictly under my exclusive systems, my unyielding rules, and my 100% absolute ownership. Nolan looked at me from across the room. This was arguably the most painful moment of his life, but miraculously, it was also his most mature. He did not protest. He did not attempt to negotiate or offer empty promises. He quietly picked up a pen and signed the required waiver forms, permanently relinquishing any remaining phantom rights to the assets. He looked at me, his eyes entirely empty of their former arrogance, and softly admitted that I was the only person on earth capable of turning that pile of corporate ashes into something meaningful. For the very first time in his life, he finally dropped the exhausting, fraudulent act of the chosen heir. Several months later, the transition was complete. The morning air was sharp and cold as I stood at the front of my newly acquired, massive central warehouse. The space was completely transformed, humming with the organized, relentless energy of the Iron Ledger team. My workforce had easily tripled in size, filled with familiar faces of veteran workers who were deeply grateful to be back under competent leadership. I stood on a small wooden crate to address the morning shift. I held a simple microphone in my hand, and I did not need to ask a single person for permission to speak. Outside the building, a work crew was unbolting the massive, rusted metal letters of the old Simmons sign, letting them crash heavily into the back of a scrap disposal truck. Standing near the open loading bay doors, lingering quietly in the shadows at the very back of the crowd, was my father. He possessed absolutely no power here. He had no authority to grant, no titles to bestow, and no legacy left to offer. He was just an old man watching a well-oiled machine operate. But as I looked at him, I realized he finally possessed enough clarity to understand the ultimate truth. The daughter he had once coldly determined was too strong to ever need his protection. The child he believed did not need to be chosen, had ultimately chosen herself. And as the sound of applause echoed through my fortress, I knew that choosing myself was the greatest victory I could have ever achieved. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below to share your location and your thoughts on how everything turned out. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, And show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can reach and inspire even more people.